They didn't know she was a police officer. They didn't know she had spent nearly 2 decades protecting this city. They only saw the one thing this society has always used to measure the value of a human life: skin color. And in just a few minutes, a black woman walking into a shopping mall to buy a birthday present for her niece was turned into a suspect, surveilled, insulted, handcuffed in front of hundreds of people, as if she weren't a person, but a walking accusation. But this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a moment of professional oversight. Behind it lay something far darker, a system that knows exactly what it's doing, a machine that profits from the humiliation, the fear, and the very existence of black people, an underground pipeline that has swallowed the lives of dozens, hundreds of victims, unnoticed, unheard, unacknowledged, until she decided to stand up. And the moment she opened her mouth to speak the truth, the entire power structure moved to crush her. But they forgot one thing: the truth, once wounded deeply enough, becomes a fire that burns down even those who believe themselves untouchable. Today's story is not just outrage, not just pain. It is everything black people in America have been forced to face, even as the world demands their silence. And you are about to witness every layer of deception peeled back, every true face exposed, every life torn apart, until the moment an entire city has no choice but to rise and scream, "Enough." If you think you've ever been angry watching news about racism, then prepare yourself, because this story will make you tremble. Before we begin, hit subscribe on Racist Reality, because after this video, you'll want more. You'll want to know the other truths America tries to hide. And you'll understand why we must tell these stories. Tell them until justice truly exists for everyone. A shopping trip that should have been ordinary. The summer afternoon in Atlanta glowed with a soft golden light, the kind of light anyone would welcome after a long week buried in work. Captain Alicia Brown, 41 years old, her face carrying the firm strength of a veteran officer softened by 2 decades of serving her community, stepped out of her car at Liberty Square Mall with a rare feeling: peace. No emergency call, no exhausting meeting, just a simple mission: buying a birthday gift for Zoe, the niece Alicia loved like her own child. At that moment, Alicia was simply a woman hoping for a quiet afternoon, an aunt wanting to pick out something special to make up for the birthdays she'd missed because of endless shifts. She adjusted the strap of the brown leather handbag on her shoulder, the bag she'd saved for months to buy, a small reward to herself, then walked into the wide mall atrium. Cool air from the vents, children laughing, heels clicking lightly on the floor. Everything felt so normal that Alicia almost forgot who she was, forgot the weight of expectations and pressure she carried every day. But that peace lasted exactly 8 minutes. As Alicia passed a tall glass storefront that reflected her full silhouette, she saw behind her not just her own reflection, but 2 other figures, 2 mall security guards, one tall, broad-shouldered, walking with a confidence bordering on arrogance. The other shorter, his steps hesitant, his eyes flickering with a hint of reluctance. They weren't looking around. They weren't talking. They were looking at her. The tall guard's cap held a name tag, Callahan. The shorter one, Santos. They followed her with the kind of movement Alicia had witnessed far too many times in her career, just enough distance to pretend they were patrolling, but close enough to make it clear who their target was. Alicia felt the cold crawl down her spine. Not from fear, but from the familiar, lingering, bitter sensation any black person in this country has tasted at some point in their life. She had seen that look hundreds of times. The look of someone who believes they have the right to judge you simply because of your skin color. A look that needs no evidence, no reason, only prejudice. And then Callahan's voice crackled through the radio, not bothering to lower the volume. Black female, brown leather bag, blue sweater, maintain distance. Alicia froze for a single breath. Not because she hadn't heard lines like that before, but because it was the same script, the same tone, the same smug certainty, the certainty of someone who believed no one could ever challenge him, that his words carried unquestionable authority. 20 years in the force had taught Alicia countless things: how to read criminals, how to analyze a crime scene, how to look a liar in the eye and know he was trembling inside. But the most painful lesson her career had taught her was something entirely different. That even as an officer, even as a captain, even with a gold badge on her chest, she could still be treated like a shoplifter in an instant, simply because she was black. Alicia gripped the strap of her bag lightly and inhaled deeply. She could turn around, flash her badge, and watch both men pale instantly. She could demand to see mall management. She could shake the entire mall if she chose to. But today, she just wanted to buy Zoe a gift, a small gift, a beautiful moment for the girl who was growing up so quickly. Alicia swallowed the bitterness. Not today. She wouldn't let them steal this precious afternoon from her. She stepped into Aurora Boutique, a gleaming jewelry store filled with warm golden lights and a faint vanilla scent. Soft jazz floated through the air, everything evoking a sense of calm. But the only person who wasn't calm was the manager behind the counter. The woman's face tightened the moment she saw Alicia. Her eyes flicked down to the brown leather bag, then scanned Alicia from head to toe as if evaluating whether she was worthy of being in the store. Name tag, Karen Whitfield. Her voice was cold, her half-smile stiff and empty. "How can I help you?" Alicia kept her tone gentle, avoiding conflict. "I'm just looking around." "Thank you." But Karen didn't take her eyes off her. In the mirror behind the counter, Alicia saw it clearly. The woman was watching every tiny movement she made, as if waiting for one suspicious action. Outside the glass, Callahan and Santos hovered nearby, pretending to study the mall directory, their hands resting near their radios. Alicia tried to focus on the bracelets, not because she was fascinated by the glittering jewelry, but because she needed something, anything, to hold on to dull the sting of the moment. She thought of Zoe's smile, thought of the birthday evening, thought of how if she could just choose this gift, everything would be fine. But the battles black people face in life are rarely ones they create. They are imposed, sparked by looks, whispers, mindless suspicion, and sometimes they erupt on the very day they simply want to be ordinary, like everyone else. Today was one of those days, and Alicia could feel, with painful clarity, that fate was pushing her toward a storm she never wanted to enter. From prejudice to accusation, forced bag search, calling the police. The air in Aurora Boutique, usually serene and elegant, grew eerily cold as Alicia stood before the glass display. Karen, the manager, stood so close Alicia could hear her breath, fast, tense, not the tension of fear, but the tension of someone who had already written her conclusion and was just waiting for the tiniest excuse to act on it. Alicia kept her voice steady as she pointed at a silver bracelet with a star-shaped charm, one Zoe had mentioned during dinner. Karen bent down to unlock the display case, but her hands were visibly shaking, as if she were serving a dangerous threat rather than a customer shopping for her niece. "Here," Karen said, placing the bracelet in Alicia's hand. But her eyes never left the brown leather bag on Alicia's shoulder. A sharp, dissecting, suspicious stare that sliced through Alicia's pride like a blade. Outside, Callahan and Santos moved closer. No more pretending. Callahan began speaking into his radio. Their movements were too obvious, too blatant, too familiar. Alicia closed her eyes for a second. She had endured hundreds of acts of discrimination from her own colleagues over 2 decades, but being treated like a criminal while simply trying to buy a gift for her niece, that was a deeper wound. And then, in that moment, Karen spoke. A sentence that shattered every effort Alicia had made to remain calm. "I need to see inside your bag." Karen's voice had shed every trace of polite pretense. It rang out sharp, cold, decisive, as though she had just caught a criminal red-handed. Customers in the store turned to look. The jazz music seemed to stop. Time froze for a split second. Alicia straightened, tilting her head slightly, her eyes a mix of disbelief and hurt. "What did you say?" "There's an item missing from this display case. I saw you put something in your bag." The accusation hit like a slap. No evidence, no camera check. Just one thing: prejudice. Outside, Callahan and Santos immediately stepped in as if they'd been waiting for the cue. The glass window reflected the image of 3 men closing in, 2 security guards and a male customer pretending to browse while staring straight at Alicia. They were surrounding her. Alicia felt her body react, her heartbeat quickening, breath deepening, every nerve pulled tight. Not from fear, but from the anger that had been compressed inside her for years, now hammering against her chest. But she had to stay calm. She knew exactly how quickly this situation could spiral into disaster if she lost control, especially when everyone had already decided she was guilty based solely on her skin color. Karen crossed her arms. "If you have nothing to hide, just open your bag. It's simple." Alicia kept her voice steady. "I didn't touch anything except the bracelet you handed me, and you know that." Callahan cut in, his tone dripping with empty authority. "Ma'am, just cooperate. Don't make this difficult." The way he spoke to her, as if she were a stubborn child who needed to be corrected. No, worse. As if she were the kind of person who caused trouble. The kind of person they thought they already knew the moment she walked into the store. Alicia lifted her chin. Her voice was low, but razor-sharp. "You have no right to search my bag without evidence or legal cause." Santos shifted uneasily, clearly uncomfortable. But he stayed silent. He stood on the stronger side. The side with power. The side he believed was safest. Karen suddenly lost patience, her voice rising. "If you don't cooperate, I'll call the police, and trust me, they will get here very quickly." Alicia let out a short laugh, bitter, hollow. They would get here quickly. She knew exactly what that meant. It meant someone inside the system, maybe several, was familiar with this script. Suspicion, call, detain, justify, release, or charge at will. She tightened her grip on her bag strap and faced Karen, Callahan, and the whole charade of what they called security. "I will not let anyone humiliate me just because they think I fit their picture of a thief." Callahan stepped forward, pressing his authority. "Ma'am, this is your last chance. Open the bag." Alicia stepped back, not in fear, but to regain space, to avoid being boxed in. The disrespect had reached its peak. She tried to keep her voice steady, but the anguish, the fury of 100 past misjudgments, poured into every word. "You're doing this for one reason. I'm a black woman walking into this store with an expensive bag." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Alicia held up a hand, stopping her. "And I refuse to let this turn into a public bag search for the sake of satisfying anyone's prejudice." The air felt ready to explode. Eyes locked on Alicia. Karen stumbled over her words, shaken by being confronted so directly. Callahan tightened his grip on his radio. Santos wavered visibly. Then, in a breath stretched thin as wire, Callahan raised his radio to his lips. "Code 10 at Aurora Boutique. Non-compliant subject. Request police immediately." Alicia closed her eyes for 1 second. The storm she didn't want to enter had chosen her, and it was about to tear through her life in ways no one could have predicted. The arrival of racist cop officer Kyle Reynolds. Violence and public humiliation. Callahan's radio call hadn't even finished buzzing through the air when the boutique doors trembled under the weight of heavy footsteps approaching fast. Alicia had heard that kind of stride hundreds of times. The stride of a man in uniform carrying far too much power and far too little restraint. A figure blocked the entrance. The moment he appeared, the entire boutique fell into a chilling silence. Officer Daniel Reynolds. A man everyone in the department knew, not for commendations, but for complaints, buried investigations, and murky incidents involving black civilians. Alicia had never worked directly with him, but his file had crossed her desk more than once. Each time, the only thing that kept Reynolds from facing consequences were the connections he climbed like rungs on a ladder built from privilege. Today, his steel-gray eyes locked onto Alicia with a twisted kind of delight, almost eager, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. "What's the problem here?" Reynolds said, his voice louder than necessary. Not because he needed information, but because he wanted everyone to know he had arrived. Karen practically rushed toward him, her expression shifting from tension to a kind of artificial relief. "Thank God you're here. I saw her hide something in her bag, and when I asked to check, she refused. Then she started raising her voice." Alicia let out a dry laugh. "Raising my voice? I'm standing here breathing, and somehow that's already too much for you." Reynolds shot Alicia a glance, but not the kind an officer gives when assessing a situation. It was the look of someone who believed he had just spotted the criminal. Callahan chimed in, adding layers to the story, embellishing every sentence as if he wanted to carve his own signature into the incident. "We've been watching her since she entered the mall. Suspicious behavior. Looking around constantly. Bags unusually heavy." Alicia responded in a calm tone that carried fire underneath. "My bag is heavy because I carry a wallet, a notebook, and my car keys, not someone else's gold. And even if it were heavy, that still isn't your business." Reynolds raised a hand, silencing everyone. His eyes didn't search for truth. They wandered over Alicia, hungry for something, anything, to justify what he already wanted to do. "Ma'am," Reynolds said, "place your bag on the counter, now." Alicia met his gaze, the gaze of a seasoned officer who had fought countless battles, but also the gaze of a woman exhausted from constantly having to prove her innocence simply because of her skin color. "I do not consent. There is no evidence, no camera confirmation, no legal basis for you to search my belongings." Reynolds gave a faint smile, the smile of someone who believed power itself was the law. "There's a statement. There's an employee report. There's non-compliant behavior. That's enough." Alicia felt the ground beneath her tilt, not because she doubted herself, but because she knew exactly what was coming. She had seen this script play out countless times from the victim's side, and now she was standing in that same position, not as an officer, but as a target. Reynolds moved one step closer. "Put the bag down." The words weren't just a command. They were a declaration that he had already decided she was a criminal. Santos, silent since the beginning, looked at Alicia, then at Reynolds. His eyes flickered with uncertainty, but Callahan grew more aggressive, stepping forward slightly. Both men faced Alicia as though the slightest signal from Reynolds would send them lunging toward her. Alicia stood tall, her gaze locked on Reynolds. "I am not resisting. I am asking for the basic rights any citizen is entitled to." Reynolds moved close enough that the cold of his vest brushed against her cheek. "You don't have rights when you're a suspect," Alicia replied slowly, steadily. "I'm not a suspect. I'm the one being harassed." Karen cut in, her voice sharp and venomous. "Thieves always say that." Karen's words dropped the room into a pit. Alicia felt the humiliation ignite in her chest, not just because of the baseless accusation, but because of the certainty in Karen's voice, the certainty that everyone would believe her over a black woman. Alicia barely had time to react before Reynolds suddenly grabbed her shoulder. The movement was fast, violent, leaving no room to defend herself. Her shoulder slammed into the glass display behind her, sending the jewelry inside rattling loudly. Customers screamed. A sharp bolt of pain shot through her body. Alicia stared wide-eyed at Reynolds, his expression stripped of all restraint. It was the look of a man enjoying his dominance. "Don't touch me!" Alicia snapped. "This is unjustified force!" Reynolds pressed harder, a sneering laugh escaping his lips. "You're going to learn to shut your mouth!" The entire store fell into a chilling silence. The truth lay bare for everyone to see. Reynolds wasn't looking for justice. He was looking for a chance to display his power. And Alicia, a black woman standing alone, was the perfect target. Alicia felt her heartbeat pounding in her throat. The anger choked her, not only because she'd been touched in such a degrading way, but because she knew this had happened to so many people like her, in so many places across America. People who had screamed, pleaded, fought to preserve their dignity, but whose voices were crushed beneath the boots of those protected by the system. Reynolds twisted her body, yanking her arm behind her back. "Non-compliant suspect, cuff her!" Alicia cried out, not in fear, but from the pain of the handcuffs cinched brutally tight, intentionally, as if he wanted to leave marks. Callahan and Karen watched with satisfaction, as if justice were being served. But this wasn't justice. It was humiliation, prejudice dressed as authority. Alicia stayed upright despite the cuffs, despite the aching fire in her shoulder. "You're abusing your authority. You're detaining me without cause. You are violating civil rights law." Reynolds snorted. "Oh yeah? Let's see who believes you." Around them, people raised their phones. They recorded. They whispered. They looked horrified. But no one stepped in. Because everyone knew stepping between a white cop and a black woman in cuffs could cost them far more than they were willing to risk. Alicia looked at them. No blame, no begging, just pain. Pain because this injustice wasn't hers alone. When Reynolds shoved Alicia out of the store, every step felt like a hammer to her soul. One thought echoed through her mind. This storm wasn't hers. But today, it chose her as its center. And from the moment Reynolds cuffed her in the middle of a crowded mall, Alicia Brown's life veered onto a road she could never turn back from. The first night after the shock, false reports, and the threat of losing everything. The afternoon wind swept through the parking lot as Reynolds pushed Alicia out of the boutique. The clatter of metal cuffs rang sharp, a declaration that she had been marked a criminal in public view. Sunlight hit her eyes, but Alicia kept her head high, refusing to let anyone see the pain tightening her chest. Because she knew, in that moment, hundreds of eyes were watching, phones raised, recording the sight of a black woman in jeans and a blue sweater, handcuffed and shoved through a crowded shopping mall. Behind the glass, Karen's face appeared. Her lips curved into a cold, triumphant smile. Callahan stood rigid, hand on his radio like he'd just performed a heroic act. Santos looked down at the floor, avoiding Alicia's gaze, but his avoidance only drove the humiliation deeper. Reynolds was different. He didn't bother hiding his excitement. Every shove, every jerk of Alicia's restrained wrists was his way of proving, to the bystanders, to himself, that he held power in his hands, and he liked it. Alicia stayed silent, but inside, she burned. Not only from the humiliation, but from the reflection of too many past stories. How many people had been labeled hostile, non-compliant, black suspect in mere seconds? How many lives had been broken by men like Reynolds? And now, she had become one of them. The words dropped the atmosphere into a pit. Alicia felt humiliation ignite in her chest, not only because of the baseless accusation, but because of the certainty in Karen's voice. The certainty that everyone would believe her over a black woman. Alicia didn't even have time to react before Reynolds suddenly seized her shoulder. The move was fast, violent, leaving no time to brace. Her shoulder slammed into the glass display behind her, jewelry clattering loudly in a sharp cascade. Customers screamed. A piercing pain shot down her side. Alicia stared at Reynolds, his eyes stripped of any restraint. It was the look of a man reveling in dominance. "Don't touch me!" Alicia snapped. "This is unjustified use of force." Reynolds pressed harder, a contemptuous laugh slipping out. "You're gonna learn to shut your mouth." The entire store fell into a suffocating silence. The truth stood naked in front of everyone. Reynolds wasn't seeking justice. He was seeking a chance to showcase his power. And Alicia, a lone black woman, was the perfect target. Alicia felt her heartbeat pounding against her throat. The rage tightened inside, not only from being touched in such a degrading way, but because she knew this had happened to countless people like her, in countless places across America. People who screamed, pleaded, fought to defend their dignity, only to have their voices crushed under the boots of those propped up by the system. Reynolds twisted her body, wrenching her arms behind her back. "Non-compliant suspect! Cuff her!" Alicia cried out, not from fear, but from the sharp, intentional sting of the handcuffs biting into her wrists. Callahan and Karen watched with satisfaction, as if justice were unfolding before them. But this wasn't justice. This was humiliation, prejudice wrapped in authority. Alicia kept herself upright, even as pain shot through her shoulder. "You're abusing your authority. You're detaining me without cause. You're violating civil rights law." Reynolds snorted. "Are we? Let's see who believes you." Around them, phones went up. People recorded. They whispered. They looked outraged. But no one interfered, because stepping between a white cop and a black woman in handcuffs was a risk no one dared take. Alicia looked at them, not blaming, not begging, just hurting. Hurting because this injustice was bigger than her. As Reynolds shoved Alicia out of the store, each step felt like a hammer blow to her soul. One thought echoed in her mind. This storm wasn't hers, but today, it chose her as its center. And from the moment Reynolds cuffed her in that mall, Alicia Brown's life diverged into a path she could never return from. At the mall's side exit, Reynolds stopped and forced Alicia against a wall. "This is your last chance," he said, his voice dripping with threat. "Cooperate, or this gets worse for you." Alicia stared straight into his eyes. "I have nothing to cooperate with. I'm innocent." Reynolds smirked, a blade slicing into her pride. "We'll see if the court believes you." The words cut deep, because Alicia knew, in the hands of someone like Reynolds, truth didn't matter. All it took was a story written faster, louder, and signed by the right badge, and a person's life could be shattered in a paragraph. Reynolds shoved Alicia into the patrol car, slamming the door so hard the frame vibrated. The back window reflected the open blue sky, but inside the air was thick, suffocating. Alicia had sat in a patrol car like this thousands of times, but always in the front, commanding, directing, resolving, never in the back, never with steel cuffs on her wrists, never as a supposed criminal. The driver door opened. Reynolds sat down, typing something into the onboard computer without looking at her. His voice droned out deliberately, as though giving a speech to himself. Subject appeared nervous, refused to comply, attempted to interfere with mall security, resisted direction. Each word hit Alicia's chest like a stone. He was writing the version the system would believe. He was building the image society was conditioned to accept about black people: aggressive, uncooperative, dangerous. Alicia inhaled slowly, fighting the urge to scream, to kick the glass, to let her justified anger become another weapon used against her in the report. But inside, she felt that familiar, brutal ache. The pain of being stripped of the right to tell her own story, the pain of being drowned out by the voice of a man propped up by a system that had protected him for years. As the car rolled forward, Alicia leaned her head back, eyes burning, not from tears, but from restraint. She thought of Zoe, How the little girl would react if she knew her aunt had been handcuffed in the middle of Atlanta's biggest mall. She thought of her parents, who had taught her she'd need to work twice as hard just to be treated like everyone else. She thought of 20 years of service, 20 years standing between danger and the people she'd sworn to protect. All of it. Only to end up in the back of a patrol car, like so many other victims of racial prejudice. The car stopped in a side lot, far from the main entrance, hidden from public view. Reynolds got out, opened the back door, and yanked Alicia up without care. "Move!" he barked. "Don't make me repeat myself." Alicia was led into the mall's holding room, a small, cold, gray place with flickering fluorescent lights, as if it wasn't worth repairing. Callahan and Santos followed. Karen stood at the doorway, watching with triumphant delight. Reynolds approached the desk and began typing. "Name," he said. "Full." Alicia stared at him, silent. In that silence, she felt something tearing inside her, the clash between the humiliation of being forced to answer like a criminal and the instinct of a seasoned officer who had processed hundreds of cases just like this. Reynolds slammed his hand on the table. "Name!" Alicia finally responded, each word heavy as molten iron. "Captain Alicia Brown." The room froze. Callahan's eyes widened. Santos blinked rapidly. Karen stepped back. Reynolds paused for 2 full seconds, 2 seconds that made Alicia's heart stop. Then he laughed. "Oh, really? A captain?" His voice dripped with mockery. Alicia held her chin high. "Check my bag. My badge is inside." Reynolds folded his arms, his smirk twisting into derision. "You think I'm stupid enough to fall for that? Anyone can print a fake badge." Alicia narrowed her eyes. "Not a captain's badge." Reynolds slammed the desk. "I told you already, you don't have rights. I am the law here." And that was the moment Alicia understood. He would never give her a chance. He would twist the truth into the cleanest, most convenient shape, shaping her into exactly what he had decided she was from the first second. A black woman who stole and resisted. Reynolds tightened the cuffs one more notch, deliberately. Alicia clenched her teeth through the pain. Behind the rapid clacking of keys, she heard it clearly. Her life was about to plunge into its darkest chapter, and the man holding the pen to write the first page was Officer Reynolds. The system's meat grinder, false arrest, forced plea, private probation, money extraction. When Alicia stepped through her front door that evening, her wrists were still burning, as if the cuffs were still digging into her skin, deep red marks etched into her flesh. A brutal reminder of an afternoon that was supposed to be nothing more than buying her niece a birthday gift. She had been released, not because the system suddenly opened its eyes, but because a sergeant recognized her, whispered something into Reynolds' ear, couldn't bear to make eye contact with her, and then hurriedly handled it internally. No apology, no admission of wrongdoing, just uncuffed hands and the cold dismissal. "We'll continue the investigation." Alicia set her bag on the kitchen table and stood still in the dark for a long moment. Streetlights filtered through the curtains, casting a long, heavy shadow of her body across the floor. Her home, once a refuge after brutal shifts, now felt unfamiliar, as though it didn't know whether to welcome her as a captain or as the suspect who had just walked out of custody. When she opened her laptop, the glow pulled her into instinctive routine. Internal emails, reports, updates from command. There was a new message. The subject line made her stomach tighten. Incident report, Liberty Square Mall, subject, Captain Alicia Brown. Her hand trembled slightly as she clicked. The words appeared like cold knives. The subject appeared agitated upon contact with mall security. Refused a reasonable request to inspect the bag after the reported theft. Became verbally aggressive and attempted to step toward security personnel. Officer intervened to prevent escalation. Subject resisted. Subject struck officer during attempt to place in custody. Alicia reread the line, subject struck officer. It sat there, calm, matter-of-fact, as if it were the truth. It didn't mention Reynolds slamming her into the glass. Didn't mention the cuffs tearing into her skin. Didn't mention humiliation, violence, or bias. It tell one story, a hostile black woman attacking an officer. Alicia removed her hands from the keyboard and leaned back in her chair. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were collapsing inward. 30 seconds, a minute. Then several minutes passed. And she still couldn't pull her eyes away from those sentences. Not because she didn't understand, but because she understood too well. She had seen reports like this her entire career. But always from the side of the reviewer, the investigator. She had filtered truth from lines written from positions of power. She had questioned reports, requested camera footage, demanded witnesses, and she had often been labeled difficult for refusing to swallow an officer's version of events without scrutiny. Today, she was the subject. She was the character distorted between emotionless lines. A sudden knock at the door made her jump, her heart skipping. She looked through the peephole and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Rachel Miller, her best friend of 15 years, stood there with a bag of Chinese takeout in one hand and a bottle of wine tucked under her arm. "Angel called me," Rachel said as Alicia opened the door. "I brought reinforcements, and I'm fully prepared to curse out the entire planet on your behalf." Alicia tried to smile, but it faded quickly when she handed Rachel the laptop. "Read it. See how they turned me into a monster." Rachel set the food down, wiped her hands on her jeans, and leaned over the screen. Her face, usually sharp and animated in the courtroom, slowly transformed. First, a frown, then narrowed eyes, then a long, heavy exhale. "Jesus," Rachel whispered, "this reads exactly like the reports I see in cases I defend, except this time the name under subject is yours." Alicia leaned against the counter, arms folded tightly across her chest, as if she had to hold herself together. "Welcome to the world I've been trying to warn them about. One report, one click, and a person's entire life changes shape." Rachel looked up, fury glowing in her brown eyes. "You know what this means, right? They're building a file, not just to justify what happened, but to justify whatever they want to do next with your career." They sat down at the kitchen table, but neither touched the food. The warm smell of takeout hung in the air, cruelly contrasting with the suffocating weight pressing down on the room. Rachel opened the stack of files she had brought from her office. "Before coming here, I reviewed some old cases around Liberty Square. I wanted to believe this was just a one-off, some rogue officer acting alone. But Alicia, look." She spread the files across the table. Different names, different faces, all sharing one thing in common. They were black. "This is Jamal, 19, arrested for resisting arrest after protecting his sister in a clothing store at Liberty. This is Monique, 34, accused of assault on an officer after asking why she was being told to leave the mall." Rachel tapped her fingers on the table, the rhythm matching each name she read. The pattern? Almost all of them end in guilty pleas. They plead out to avoid heavier charges, even when they did nothing wrong. Alicia picked up a file, reading the lines as though she were looking at an alternate version of her own life. They were charged because they dared to ask why, just like me. Rachel nodded, bitterness flashing in her eyes. "And guess who shows up the most as the arresting officer in these cases?" Alicia didn't need to look. "Reynolds." "Bingo." Rachel slid a summary table toward her, Reynolds' name repeated down the arresting officer column like a stamp. "But this," Rachel said, pulling out another printout, "is the disgusting part. It was a contract between the city and a private company. Bright Path Supervision Services." "Probation company," Alicia guessed. "Yeah. Most people who take plea deals get pushed into BrightPath's probation program. The paperwork calls it supervision and reintegration support. Sounds noble, right? Rachel gave a cold laugh. But if you read the fine print, monthly supervision fees, drug test fees, meeting fees, they turn conditional freedom into a debt trap. Alicia felt her stomach knot. And the people trapped in it are all black, poor, or both? Pretty much. Rachel flipped to an organizational chart printed on the next page. BrightPath isn't independent. It's a subsidiary of Horizon Capital Group. Alicia blinked. The name was too familiar. Horizon also owns Liberty Square Mall, Rachel continued. And the security company Callahan works for, Stonewall Security, is also part of Horizon. A perfect loop: mall, security, police like Reynolds, court, probation, BrightPath. All the money flows to the same place. In that instant, everything snapped together in Alicia's mind. A puzzle hidden for years behind the illusion of normal procedure. Stories she had heard in passing, cases Rachel mentioned on late nights, names repeated in internal emails, all suddenly aligning into one horrifying chain. "You're telling me," Alicia said slowly, "that this wasn't just racial bias, it was profit." "Not just profit," Rachel corrected, her voice heavy. "A system designed to squeeze every dollar out of the people with the least power. And they use guys like Reynolds to do the dirty work, while the people above sit back and count their money." Alicia leaned back in her chair, eyes staring at the ceiling as if searching for air, for balance, for anything that didn't feel like her entire belief system cracking open. She had defended this system, sat in meetings insisting it was a few bad apples, argued that reform is possible from within. She had believed her badge was a promise, that justice could mend cracks. But looking at the names, BrightPath, Horizon, Reynolds repeated like a drumbeat, she had to face a brutal truth. Maybe the structure had been built from the very beginning to crush people who looked like her. Rachel stayed silent for a moment, giving Alicia space to absorb the blow. "Listen," she said softly. "Alicia, I'm not telling you what to do. I just need you to understand. This isn't about a humiliating afternoon at the mall. It's bigger, much bigger. It's a machine, a whole model, and you are the first person with enough credibility, enough integrity, enough grit. Who might be able to crack it open?" Alicia stared at the files scattered across the table. Every name on the page felt like a plea. Every black and white face hung in the air like a question. If not her, then who? If not now, then when? The ache in her wrists still lingered, a reminder of the cold metal cutting into her skin. But beneath that pain, something else was rising. Slowly, stubbornly, burning like a buried ember. It wasn't faith in the system anymore. It was the determination to confront it. "All right," Alicia finally said, her voice low but steady. "If they want to turn me into the subject in their reports, then I'll turn myself into the first witness in the case against them." Rachel looked at her, her eyes softening but brightening all at once. "So, where do we start?" Alicia pulled the laptop closer, opening the police department's internal access portal. "We start with the one thing they assume no one bothers to look at, their own data." That night, in a small kitchen lit only by the glow of a laptop screen while the rest of the city slept, a captain whose career had been smeared and suspended in uncertainty quietly unlocked the first doors leading into the dark heart of a system. And she had no idea that what she was about to uncover would be even more terrifying than the handcuffs that cut into her wrists earlier that day. Meeting journalist Jasmine Ortiz and the Justice Coalition. A media community alliance. The nights that followed became a long blur of sleepless hours. Alicia and Rachel sat in front of the laptop until sunrise, combing through internal emails, arrest records, every repeated name and pattern. But the deeper they dug, the more Alicia realized that the truth they needed wasn't only in the system, It lived outside, in the voices of the harmed, in forgotten videos, in stories no one had ever listened to. And that path led them to an unexpected figure, Jasmine Ortiz. The connection began with a single unexpected text on a Tuesday afternoon. Alicia was sitting in her car, trying to breathe after a tense meeting at the law office when her phone buzzed. On the screen, Jasmine O. Atlanta Post. The name made Alicia pause. Jasmine was a 32-year-old journalist known for her searing investigative pieces on police abuse and social injustice. She was considered a thorn in the side of many public agencies, but a vital voice in the community. Alicia had never met her, but she'd read Jasmine's articles that dared to go where others stayed silent. The message contained only one sentence: "I believe you, and I have something you need." Alicia replied, "Where?" Jasmine sent a location immediately: a small cafe deep in the West End, a place where many stories of injustice began. When Alicia walked in, Jasmine was already there. Long black hair tied high, sharp eyes, posture alert. But the guarded look softened when she saw Alicia. She stood, offering her hand. Not the formal handshake of a journalist, but the handshake of someone who understood deeply the kind of pain Alicia was carrying. "I watched the video from the mall," Jasmine said, voice steady and low. "I saw the way he twisted your arm, the way people looked at you. I've watched a lot of videos like that. But this one is different." "Different how?" Alicia asked. "Because this time it was a captain." Jasmine held her gaze. If the system dares to do that to someone with a gold badge, imagine what they've been doing to people who have no one to defend them. Alicia felt her throat tighten. That sentence was like a door opening into everything she had thought, but hadn't dared say aloud. Jasmine pulled a thin folder from her bag and placed it on the table. "I've been tracking Reynolds and Brightpath for 6 months. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have enough data to prove it. I just needed someone on the inside, someone who understands the system enough to see what I'm seeing." Alicia opened the folder. Inside were old incident reports, photos of injuries, blurry cell phone videos. But what made her skin crawl was the long list at the back. Names of people arrested around Liberty Square, with nearly identical write-ups, copied and pasted. Acted aggressively. Resisting arrest. Threat to officer safety. No camera footage, no witnesses, just Reynolds' signature and a few others. Jasmine continued, her voice tightening. "I want to bring this into the light, but I can't do it alone. I need you, not as a victim, but as an officer who's been on the inside." Alicia opened her mouth to respond, but Jasmine was already standing. "If you want to keep going, meet me tonight at the Justice Coalition. They're waiting." Justice Coalition Atlanta was housed inside a renovated old church. Its walls still bearing the scars of time, but inside the space pulsed with energy. Photos of victims, investigation documents, maps covered in red pins, whiteboards crammed with patterns, timelines, connections. Blue plastic chairs were arranged in a circle, as if for a support group or a war council. The door opened, and Reverend Marcus Green, a black man in his early 50s, his kind eyes heavy with the weight of his community's pain, stepped forward and gently embraced Alicia. "We know very well the battle you're stepping into," he said, "and you are not alone." Beside him stood Lydia Chen, a young Chinese-American high school teacher who collected community video evidence and documented police misconduct with meticulous detail. They led Alicia past board after board, legal filings, maps of arrests around Liberty Square, faces of young people whose lives had been crushed by the system. On one wall hung the photo of a 15-year-old boy, a bruise around his eye, his lip split. "That's Malik," Lydia whispered, "arrested for sitting in the food court waiting for his mom. Reynolds said he was wandering suspiciously." Alicia stared at the photo, a sharp pain twisting inside her, a life branded dangerous because of one misplaced glance, a child turned into a criminal because Reynolds needed to meet a quota, or worse, because the system needed a new black body to funnel into probation. Jasmine placed a hand on Alicia's shoulder. "You're not the first, but you could be the last if we do this right." Alicia swallowed the tightness in her throat, her eyes scanning each document as though touching someone else's unhealed wounds. I don't know if I'm strong enough to tear open an entire system," she admitted. Reverend Green stepped forward, his voice deep and warm, carrying an unexpected strength. "No one is strong enough alone, but you are no longer alone. And when someone like you, someone who believed in the system her whole life, is betrayed by that very system, your voice carries more weight than anyone's." Alicia looked at the circle of people before her, people who had lost children, siblings, futures, people who had lost their trust in institutions, but still showed up, still fought, still believed in justice, even when justice refused to believe in them. They looked at her with expectation. Not the expectation that she would save them, but the hope that for the first time they had someone who understood the machine from the inside, someone who could strike it where it was hardest. A deep breath escaped Alicia's chest. The tears didn't fall. They sat quietly in the corners of her eyes, as if they had grown too accustomed to this kind of pain. "All right," Alicia whispered, though her voice carried clearly across the small room. "I'll fight with you." A single clap rang out, then another. Then the entire room rose, their applause mixing with shaky breaths, a fragile sound of hope from hearts that had been shattered too many times. That night, in the cramped room of the Justice Coalition, Alicia Brown understood that this battle was no longer just hers. It belonged to a community, a city, a truth buried for far too long. And she, humiliated, smeared, betrayed, was the missing piece the movement had been waiting for. Threats, surveillance, betrayal from within. The next morning opened with a pale light slipping through the curtains, but to Alicia, the sky felt heavy and gray. She poured herself a cup of coffee without tasting it. Everything around her was too still, the kind of silence that comes before a storm breaks. Then a notification lit up her phone. A message from an unknown number. No name, no greeting. "If you keep digging into this, you won't be the only one who pays." Alicia froze. Her pupils tightened, breath catching in her chest. The message was short, but sharp enough to rip through the thin layer of calm she had forced around herself. This wasn't the clumsy threat of some coward hiding behind a burner phone. The tone was precise, cold, as if the sender knew her, knew the system, knew every vulnerability she'd ever tried to bury. She took a screenshot, then set the phone carefully on the table. The coffee still steamed, but her hands trembled too hard to lift it. The kitchen light cast harsh shadows across her tired face, reflecting a painful truth. This had gone far beyond humiliation at a mall. This was a line drawn between her and the hidden powers orchestrating racial discrimination in Atlanta, the unseen hands pulling strings from the dark. Before she could steady her breath, a second message arrived. "Everyone you care about. Think carefully before risking your life for something that isn't yours." Alicia's grip tightened around the phone, veins rising along her hand. She thought of her mother, sleepless for days after hearing she'd been arrested. She thought of Kayla, the little girl she loved like her own daughter. She thought of Rachel, the one person who had stood beside her from the very beginning. Alicia's knees almost buckled for a moment. Then her instincts as a seasoned officer, someone who'd faced murder scenes, armed suspects, and the worst kind of men, rose up inside her. She took a deep breath. She didn't delete the messages. She saved them, sent copies to Rachel, then stood up as if a new current of blood had just surged through her. the blood of resistance. That afternoon, Alicia drove to the office of attorney Rachel Hart. Golden sunlight stretched across Atlanta's streets, but it couldn't chase away the feeling of eyes watching her at every stoplight. When Alicia entered, Rachel was already at her laptop, her face tense. "Did you get this too?" Alicia asked, voice hoarse but steady, laying her phone on the desk. Rachel looked at the screen, and her eyes widened. "Alicia, this isn't some amateur threat. This is someone who knows exactly what we're touching." Alicia sank into the chair, her fingers interlaced, hoping it would hide the trembling in her palms. "I know," she said quietly. "That's why I came." Rachel sighed, stood up, and poured 2 glasses of water. "We need to have a serious conversation about how dangerous this really is." Alicia met her friend's eyes, her own steady and unflinching. "I'm fully aware it's dangerous, but I'm also hurt enough that I refuse to back down." Rachel was silent for a moment. Then she pulled her laptop closer and said, "If we've come this far, then you need to see something no one else has ever seen." She opened a folder labeled Case 47B, Restricted. A cascade of files flashed onto the screen, each one a tragedy layered on top of another tragedy. Young faces, 17, 19, 22 years old, lives bright as stage lights, crushed under fabricated charges, audio recordings of mothers breaking down in courtrooms, and finally, a video that made Alicia's skin crawl. A young man handcuffed, Reynolds's knee pressed into his back, his voice barking, "Not my fault you don't know your place." Alicia's chest tightened. How long has this been happening without anyone knowing?" "It's not that no one knew," Rachel answered. "It's that no one with power or evidence was able to speak up." In that moment, Alicia felt something she had never felt so intensely in all her years on the force: the crushing weight of collective silence. Silence bought with fear, violence, and authority. She turned to Rachel. "Then why me? Why target me?" Rachel looked directly into her eyes. "Because you're an officer, a black officer. If the system can break you, they can prove to all of Atlanta that even someone in uniform can't stand against them." Alicia felt like she'd been punched in the gut. Not because Rachel was wrong, but because she was painfully right. Alicia stood, pacing the room, a hand pressed to her forehead. "I thought I was used to injustice. 12 years on the force. I thought I'd seen it all, but I never imagined it could sink this deep." Rachel spoke softly but firmly. "And the fact that you finally see the truth, that's exactly why they're panicking." Alicia turned back toward her, and despite the hurt, the betrayal, the fear, a fire burned in her eyes. "Rachel," Alicia said slowly, each word sharp with resolve, "I'm not running. Not now. Not ever." Rachel gave a small, sad smile. "I know. And I'm not letting you fight this alone." They stood there for a moment, a silence thick with mutual understanding. Pain was halved, strength was doubled. Outside the window, Atlanta buzzed on. But in that small room, 2 women were preparing to start a fight that would shake the entire city. Alicia took a deep breath. "All right, tonight we meet Jasmine and the coalition. And after that, I want to start tracing BrightPath's financials. If we're going to take them down, we expose the one thing they actually care about." Rachel nodded. "Money." Alicia tightened her fist. No longer a victim. No longer someone hunted. Now she was the hunter, determined to tear apart every dark corner, every file, every dirty dollar that had turned black lives into revenue streams. Inside her wasn't just pain. There was the fury of generations before her, the hopes of people crushed every day by the system. And in that moment, she knew. Whatever came next, she would not look back. She would not turn away. She would not tremble. Because sometimes, to end decades of injustice, It takes a woman who has suffered enough to stop knowing fear. Suspension, smear campaigns, psychological isolation. And then a light, Zoe and the power of social media. That evening, Atlanta's sky was coated with a heavy gray layer of clouds, as if the city itself were holding its breath before an unavoidable reckoning. Alicia drove to Rachel's office, their staging ground for reviewing every piece of evidence before moving into the next phase. She parked under a street lamp whose dim yellow glow stretched their shadows long, making the parking lot feel like it shivered with an unnamed unease. When Alicia stepped inside, Rachel was standing by the window, phone pressed tight to her ear, her face tense. Her eyes stayed fixed on the dark street below, as if she were trying to determine whether someone was watching them. Alicia could hear only fragments of Rachel's call. "Say that again. Are you sure?" "All right. Thank you. Stay in touch." Rachel hung up and turned, her eyes filled with warning. "I just got news. About Maya." Alicia felt her heart drop out of her chest. She stepped toward Rachel quickly. "What? What happened to Maya?" Rachel swallowed hard, as if holding herself together. "They found her this morning, beaten unconscious in the parking lot of the newsroom." Alicia stood motionless, rooted to the floor. The air in the room thickened instantly, so heavy it felt impossible to breathe. The faint hope that the threats were just intimidation vanished. This wasn't a warning, not a scare tactic. This was war. Rachel continued, voice unsteady. "Her skull was hit hard. Her left arm is broken. There are handprints on her neck. Like someone wanted to send a message, hurt her badly, but keep her alive just enough so she never investigates again." Alicia had to grip the back of a chair to keep herself upright. A cold wave raced down her spine, a mixture of fear and a fury so intense it blurred her vision. "Oh, God," Alicia whispered. "I dragged her into this. I got her hurt." "No," Rachel said firmly, stepping forward and gripping Alicia's shoulders. "This isn't your fault. Maya knew the risks. She chose to stand on the side of truth. This is the fault of the people who want to bury their crimes, not yours." But Alicia couldn't hear anything except the pounding of her own heartbeat, the swell of guilt and pain burning in her chest. She saw Maya's face, bright, fierce, unstoppable, now lying in a hospital bed, broken by the same system Alicia once believed in. It suffocated her. The cruel truth. They wanted to destroy every voice that stood with her. Rachel then set an envelope on the desk. "Someone delivered this to my office this morning." Alicia opened it. A photograph slipped out onto the table. Her house. Shot from a hidden angle across the street. The camera captured her license plate, her living room window, and a small figure stepping up her porch steps. Kayla. Alicia's face drained of color. Her mind roared with static. "No? No? No?" Rachel gently touched her shoulder. "Turn it over." Alicia flipped the photo. On the back, a single sentence, scrawled in black ink, crooked, messy, and ice-cold. "Are you sure you want to continue?" Alicia's legs nearly gave out. The photo blurred through the burn of her eyes. This wasn't a threat anymore. This was a declaration of war against the person she loved most. In that moment, Alicia understood something about the people behind this machine. They believed they could break her with fear, with violence, with the suffering of the innocent. But they were horribly mistaken. Because in that exact moment, fear didn't make her weak. It turned into fire. An hour later, Alicia and Rachel were at Metro General Hospital. The hallway was long and stark white, neon lights reflecting off the polished floor like cold strips of steel. The faint scent of antiseptic drifted through the air. But beneath it was something heavier. The smell of fear, of injustice, of the fragile border between life and death. They stopped in front of Recovery Room 312. Maya lay in the bed, her face swollen and bruised, her lips split, bandages wrapped around her forehead, her left arm suspended in a sling. But her eyes, even dimmed by pain and shadow, still held that familiar spark. Unbroken. Alicia sat down beside her, gently taking Maya's hand. The coldness in her skin shot through Alicia like a blade. "Maya, I'm so sorry," Alicia whispered, her voice shaking so hard it nearly broke. "I'm not worth what you—" Maya managed a painful, defiant smile. "Don't apologize. If they hit me, it means they're afraid of us, afraid of you." Alicia lowered her head, tears falling onto the back of Maya's hand. "You should never have had to go through this." "No," Maya said, weak but unwavering. "You don't understand. I've waited years for this chance. Taking down this system isn't easy, but you're the first person with enough evidence, enough strength, enough courage to do what I only dreamed of." Alicia studied her. This woman lying battered in a hospital bed, yet still unyielding, still fighting even when her body was broken. Rachel stepped closer and said softly, "She has something else for you." Maya nodded weakly. Rachel reached into her coat pocket and placed a small USB drive into Alicia's hand. "Before they attacked me," Maya whispered, "I backed up all the data on a second drive. This is the copy." Alicia closed her fingers around the USB. It felt like holding the lifeline of countless victims swallowed by the system. "Take it," Maya breathed. "Don't let anyone stop you, not even fear." Alicia felt something crush her chest, but only for a moment. Then the suffocating grief hardened into molten resolve. She leaned close and whispered, "I promise. I won't let them touch anyone else again. Not one more." Maya closed her eyes, exhaling softly. "I believe you." When Alicia stepped out of the room, she was no longer a woman threatened, no longer smeared, no longer betrayed. Under the blue hospital lights, her face was marked by two colors, the darkness of pain and the blinding light of unbreakable resolve. Rachel walked beside her, silently witnessing the transformation. As if Alicia had crossed an invisible threshold, leaving behind the version of herself that once knew fear. Alicia stopped at the end of the hallway, pulled out her phone, switched off the block unknown numbers setting, and typed a 3-word reply to the person who threatened her. "I'm not stopping." Then she shut the screen and slipped the phone deep into her pocket. Inside her, only one thing remained. If the system wanted a fight, then she would fight. No retreat, no hesitation, no pause. And for the first time since being humiliated in that mall, Alicia felt that her pain finally had a purpose. Erupting protests and Imani's uncut video. The morning after leaving the hospital, Alicia woke with a feeling that was both exhaustion and a simmering flame of anger. A knock sounded at the door, and when she opened it, a cream-colored envelope lay on the floor. The Atlanta Police Department logo in the upper left corner felt as cold as a blade. She opened it, her hand trembling even though her heart already knew what it would say. "Notice of suspension, effective immediately." 20 years of honor compressed into a few emotionless lines. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Headlines flashed across the screen. "Black female captain loses control in mall." "Internal sources, signs of instability." Humiliation piled on until Alicia pulled the curtains shut, letting the room sink into darkness like a shelter. The doorbell rang again. "Auntie Alicia, it's me." Zoe rushed in and hugged her tightly. "I couldn't sit still while they spread lies about you." Zoe opened her phone. "You have to see this." The arrest video, the viral version, had passed 6.2 million views. Thousands of comments poured in. "This is why black people fear shopping. She's a captain and they still treated her like that? Justice for Captain Brown." Zoe tugged the curtain slightly. Outside, a group of people were holding signs. "We believe Captain Brown. Stop criminalizing black shoppers." "It's not just here," Zoe said. "In front of Liberty Square, too. They're saying if the system silences her, we'll speak for her. That afternoon, Alicia pulled a cap low over her face and stood quietly at the edge of the crowd in Liberty Square. The chants thundered, "Justice for Alicia! No more racist cops!" Through the sea of people, a young woman approached, her voice soft but steady. "Are you Captain Brown? I'm Imani. I filmed the video that day." Alicia stared. "You filmed it?" Imani nodded, opening her phone and showing the uncut footage. From the upper floor, she had recorded the entire moment when Reynolds met with the mall's deputy director, listened to instructions, and marked out the target zone. Everything had been staged before Alicia even arrived. Alicia clenched her fist. "Why are you only giving this to me now?" Imani lowered her eyes. "I was scared. My uncle was arrested just like that and lost his job when he filed a complaint. But when I saw him slam your head into the wall, when I realized you were a captain and they still humiliated you, I understood that if people like me stay silent, they'll think they're right." Alicia looked at the young woman, feeling the trembling voice held up by a spine of steel. "If you want, I'll post the full video. Whenever you're ready, I'm ready." For the first time in days, Alicia no longer felt buried alone. Beside her wasn't just Zoe, but Imani and the thousands outside demanding justice for a woman who had been dragged and treated like a criminal. It was no longer an arrest. It had become a movement. Jasmine, from her hospital bed, exposes the guts of the money pipeline. That evening, Alicia sat at her desk with the USB drive Maya had pressed into her hand before being wheeled into surgery. The tiny device lay in her palm like a burning heart, holding something powerful enough to shake an entire city. Rachel stood behind her, arms crossed, trying to stay composed even though her breath was tight. "Are you ready?" Rachel asked. Alicia didn't answer. She plugged the USB into the laptop. A folder appeared, Bright Path Core. Inside were 4 subfolders: financials, internal reports, surveillance, personnel. But the one that sent a chill slicing down Alicia's spine was the final folder, Pipeline Tracker. "Open it," Rachel whispered. Alicia clicked. The screen flooded with a spreadsheet thousands of lines long, names, ages, neighborhoods, case codes, and a glaring red column, projected value. Alicia muttered, "Projected value? Predicting the monetary worth of a person?" Rachel clenched her jaw. "Not a person. To them, it's merchandise." Imani, whom Alicia had asked to come help, pointed to row number 2481, her voice trembling. "Look, that's my cousin. The day Reynolds choked him. Projected value $2,400. Alicia felt her stomach twist. A long catalog of black lives turned into revenue streams. They opened the surveillance folder. Secret videos appeared, not from city cameras, but from cameras the mall had installed privately. Alicia clicked one at random. Reynolds, standing with the mall's deputy director, circling the areas labeled target zones. Rachel inhaled sharply. They pre-select who's going to be suspicious. In another clip, Reynolds and the Stonewall security team, Callahan among them, stood around a printed sheet showing faces of people previously flagged for monitoring. Zoe burst out, "Auntie, this isn't security, this is hunting!" Alicia opened the internal reports folder next. PDF files analyzing risk behaviors, authorizing detainment for things like suspicious expression, walking slowly, wearing a hoodie, or appearing out of place in the environment. As Alicia read, her hands grew colder and colder. "They arrest people for a look on their face?" Imani tightened her fists. "Because they need quotas, not because people committed crimes." The personnel folder revealed the final truth. Next to Reynolds' name was a line of red text, "Primary enforcement asset, effective at generating throughput." Alicia froze. Generating throughput, meaning creating a stream of people to be arrested? Rachel nodded. Plainly put, he gets rewarded based on how many people he pushes into the system. Right then, a notification popped up on the screen. Your account is about to be locked due to unusual activity. Rachel looked at Alicia, voice urgent. They've smelled it. Imani stepped forward. If we don't post it now, they'll erase everything. I'm ready to stand with you. Alicia looked around. 3 generations, 3 lives, each crushed by this system in different ways, now standing on the same side. You're not fighting alone anymore, Zoe said. Alicia placed her hand on the mouse. 1 deep breath. 1 firm nod. She clicked upload. A small click, but powerful enough to ignite the biggest battle Atlanta had ever witnessed. A battle to expose the machine that profited off black pain. City Council meeting. The truth erupts and the racist cop falls. The moment Imani's full video and portions of the Bright Path core files went public, Atlanta detonated. Not in flames, not in riots, but in truth. The city felt like a dam finally rupturing. News stations replayed Imani's footage in a constant loop. Reynolds coordinating the setup, Callahan backing him, Karen fabricating accusations, the mall executives discussing target zones, and the damning analytics showing black shoppers being converted into projected revenue. At home, Alicia stood in the flickering glow of the television. The anchor's voice cut through the room. Could this be the biggest racial bias scandal in the history of Atlanta policing? Rachel turned toward her. You holding up? She asked softly. Alicia exhaled. Far from it. But at least the truth is out. Then a loud knock. 3 hard, decisive thuds. Rachel checked the peephole, and the color drained from her face. IA. Internal Affairs. The door opened. 2 officers entered, 1 male, 1 female, their tone colder than polished steel. Captain Brown, you need to come with us. Alicia asked, steady. What crime am I being accused of? Damaging departmental reputation, releasing confidential materials, obstructing an active investigation. Alicia let out a hollow, bitter laugh. Just say it. My crime is telling the truth. Rachel stepped in front of Alicia. You can't take her. There's no summons. She's not going anywhere. The female IA officer replied calmly, If she refuses, we are authorized to use force. Alicia placed a hand on Rachel's shoulder. Let them take me. If I run, they'll spin it as guilt. They escorted Alicia out. But outside, dozens of neighbors were already filming. Someone shouted, We stand with Captain Brown! The video went viral in minutes. Hours later, the city council chamber overflowed. Reporters on the floor, activists in the aisles, police union members glowering from the back. Alicia, escorted by legal counsel, was seated in the front row. The council chair pounded the gavel. This emergency session will examine evidence of systemic misconduct surrounding Bright Path and the arrest of Captain Alicia Brown. They played Imani's uncut footage on the big screens. Gasps rippled through the room as Reynolds' voice echoed. Those folks are our high-yield targets. Don't hesitate. Then came the spreadsheets showing projected value, and finally Reynolds' personnel file branding him. Primary enforcement asset, effective at generating throughput. A council member turned toward Alicia. Captain Brown, did you have any involvement in creating or participating in this system? Alicia rose, voice steady but burning. I spent 20 years serving this city. I never imagined the badge I wore was being used to funnel black bodies into a profit pipeline. The chamber exploded with shouts, some in rage, some in support. Reynolds was brought in next, flanked by union lawyers. His face was pale, his voice jittery. This is being blown out of proportion. But the chamber erupted. Liar! You targeted us! Justice for Captain Brown! The council chair slammed the gavel again. Sergeant Reynolds, the evidence is overwhelming. You orchestrated detainments without cause, falsified reports, and colluded with private security for monetary incentives. Reynolds's voice cracked. "I was following directives." Alicia met his eyes, unblinking. So was every officer who ever violated someone's rights and claimed it was procedure. That excuse is dead. By the end of the session, the council announced, Reynolds suspended and under criminal investigation, Bright Path contracts frozen, Stonewall security barred from operations, a full federal probe into racially motivated policing practices. As Alicia stepped outside, thousands were waiting, chanting her name. Cameras flashed, signs rose into the air. For the first time, she felt not like a suspect, but like someone the city finally heard. The movement had broken the silence. Alicia was taken to an old building, the one IA used for sensitive cases. The room they locked her in had no camera, no window, only a flickering white light like a trap. The interrogation began. Female officer. "Do you realize how much chaos you've caused?" Alicia replied slowly. "Chaos came from the truth, not from me." The male officer slammed a file onto the table. "You released classified materials. You broke the law." Alicia tilted her head. "What law allows you to put a price tag on black lives?" The interrogation room fell silent. Alicia continued, eyes sharp as a blade. "You're questioning me too fast. Why don't you ask where Reynolds is, or why the mall cameras always conveniently malfunction whenever he manipulates an arrest?" Female officer. "We're investigating." Alicia stared straight into her eyes. "No, you're stalling." The male officer growled. "If you keep this up, you'll destroy your own future." Alicia leaned back, strangely calm. "I don't have a future left to lose. You suspended me, humiliated me, and now you want to silence me. But one thing has changed." Female officer. "What's that?" Alicia lifted her head, her voice sharpening. "I'm not afraid anymore. Now it's your turn to be afraid." They detained Alicia until further notice. The door slammed shut, leaving her alone in the dark. But Alicia closed her eyes and smiled, because she knew out there Imani was spreading the truth. Rachel was gathering lawyers. Zoe was standing in the crowd holding a sign, "Justice for Aunt Alicia." Maya was watching from her hospital bed. Alicia was locked up, but the truth wasn't. Aftermath and resolution. Justice is bigger than one person. 3 days after the explosive hearing, Edgewood Plaza looked like the aftermath of a storm. Yellow tape strung across entrances, neon lights dead, shops once bright, now silent like monuments to a system just exposed. Alicia walked slowly through the atrium, her footsteps echoing across the tile floor, the very place she had once been dragged like a criminal. But today, the way people looked at her was different. A janitor recognized her, voice trembling. "Captain Brown, thank you for what you did." Alicia nodded. No applause had ever touched her as deeply as that simple, sincere gratitude. A middle-aged woman approached, eyes red. "My daughter was arrested here last year for attitude. Now her record is being cleared because of you." A young man bowed his head. "They did that to me, too. But now, things are different." Their thanks warmed Alicia's chest, not from victory, but from realizing she had helped them reclaim a voice the system had stolen. At the store where the nightmare began, Rachel and Zoe were waiting. Zoe ran into her arms. "Auntie, everyone says you're the bravest woman in Atlanta." Alicia laughed, kissing the girl's forehead. "No, sweetheart. I just refuse to let them step on me again." Rachel handed Alicia a small box. "They wanted you to have this." Inside was a pendant shaped like a bird's wing. Alicia touched it, whispering, "A wing." Rachel smiled. "Yes, because you helped them break free from the cage the system put them in." As the three of them stepped into the central hall, a wave of applause erupted. Hundreds of people stood in a circle. Signs raised high. phones live-streaming her. Someone shouted, "Justice for Alicia!" The crowd roared back, "Justice for Alicia! Justice for Alicia!" Alicia stopped in her tracks. Her eyes stung. Zoe squeezed her hand. "See? They're standing with you." Alicia looked around. Elders, youth, black, white, Latin, Asian. A united community. She smiled softly but firmly. "No, Zoe. They're standing with justice." A light breeze stirred, making the banner overhead tremble. No more silence. Alicia looked up. All of this had begun with a moment in which she was forced into silence. And now, the entire city was speaking for her. She stepped onto the hall's platform, sunlight pouring through the windows. This journey wasn't over, babe, but today, they had claimed a real victory. Alicia's story wasn't just the story of one woman, it was the echo of millions of black people who had been misunderstood, surveilled, insulted, and condemned simply because of their skin. Every time a story like hers was told, one link in a rotten system cracked. There are stories that make people angry. There are stories that make people hurt. And there are stories that make us stop. Not because we're afraid, but because we finally see the truth for what it is. Alicia Brown's story is not just about a woman humiliated in the middle of a mall, not just about a spreadsheet that put a price on black lives, not just about a system profiting off fear and the helplessness of those who had no voice. This story is about us. About what happens when voices buried for far too long suddenly rise all at once. About the truth, raw, painful, but necessary to expose so no one else ever has to endure the same injustice again. If your heart tightens even a little, if you feel this injustice cannot be allowed to continue, if you believe the world changes only when someone dares to tell the truth, then don't let the story end here. Hit subscribe to our channel right now, not just to support the channel, not just so you don't miss the next video, but because every subscription you make is a declaration. I stand on the side of justice. I will not be silent anymore. I want the truth to keep being told. Visit our channel page and keep watching the next videos. Each one is a piece of truth America tried to bury, each one a voice for those who had theirs taken away. Thank you for taking the time to listen. See you in the next video on our channel, where we are never afraid to look at what the world keeps trying to avoid.